They say a man's life can change in the time it takes to pull a trigger. For Caleb Ryder, that moment came just as the snow started falling thick and quiet over the dusty road outside Dry Creek Junction. He wasn't looking to be a hero that day. He wasn't even sure what he was still doing in this part of the country. But then he saw her. A woman with fire in her eyes, cornered by two men with more whiskey than mercy in their veins. She didn't call out, she didn't plead. She just stood her ground, like she'd already lost too much to be afraid. Caleb didn't wait to ask why she was out here alone, or what made those men follow her in the first place. He just stepped in between them, drew his coat back enough to flash the worn Colt on his hip hand, took the bullet before he could ever pull it. It burned through his side like a hot iron, and the world spun fast and cold. The last thing he remembered was her voice, not loud, but close, saying, "Don't you dare die on me." When he came to, it was quiet. Too quiet to be the saloon or the road. The air smelled like cedar smoke and boiled coffee. A fire crackled close. He tried to move, but the pain stitched lightning across his ribs. Someone had tended him, bandaged him, sat by him, and when he opened his eyes, there she was kneeling beside the cot. Her sleeves rolled up, a faint scar across her cheekbone catching the firelight. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days, but there was something gentle in her gaze, like she'd been watching over him a long time. "You're awake?" she said softly, brushing hair from her face with the back of her hand. "Didn't think you'd make it through the night." He coughed, voice gravel dry. "I don't even know your name." She hesitated, then stood slowly. "That makes two of us. You jumped in front of a bullet for a woman you don't know." "I've done dumber things," he rasped, wincing. She cracked a small, sad smile, and for a moment, the cabin didn't feel so cold. "I'm Willa," she said finally. "Willa Klein. This is my place. You're about 20 miles from Dry Creek, and lucky to be alive." He tried to sit up, but she gently pushed him back down with a firm palm to his shoulder. "You're not going anywhere. Not yet." Outside, the wind howled through the pines. A storm was coming, or maybe already here. Caleb lay back, staring at the cracked ceiling above him, listening to the wind wrap around a little wooden cabin like it was trying to get in. He didn't know who this woman was. Didn't know why those men had wanted her dead. But something in her voice, in the way she moved, quiet, capable, and guarded, told him she had secrets she hadn't spoken aloud in years. And somewhere beneath the pain and the fog, he knew one thing. That bullet may have stopped his running, but it also might have brought him to the one place he was meant to be. Just maybe. Sometimes a stranger steps into our lives and changes everything, without even knowing our name. What do you think Willa's hiding in that cabin? And why do you think Caleb didn't hesitate to protect her? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow this journey. Things are just getting started. The wind didn't let up for 2 days. It screamed through the trees like a warning, piled snow against the cabin door, and swallowed every sound beyond the fire. Inside, Willa moved with quiet purpose, feeding the flames, checking Caleb's bandages, steeping bitter herbs in water, so dark he almost mistook it for coffee. She didn't speak unless she had to, and even then, her words were measured like each one cost her something. Caleb mostly watched. His ribs still throbbed with every breath, and his pride was just sore, enough to keep him from asking too many questions. But he noticed the little things, the way she flinched at loud noises, how her eyes darted to the window each time the wind shifted, how she kept a rifle loaded and leaning by the door, even when they were alone. She was running from something. That much was plain. "You gonna tell me who those men were?" he asked on the third morning, his voice steadier now. The swelling in his side had gone down, though the wound still burned like hellfire. Willa didn't answer right away. She was slicing roots with the kind of care most folks reserved for skinning rabbits or carving names into tombstones. "They weren't after me," she said finally, her tone flat. "They were after what I knew, or what they thought I knew." "That's supposed to make sense." She shrugged. "Doesn't matter now. They're dead." Caleb blinked at her. "You shot them." "No, you slowed them down. I finished it." For a moment, the cabin felt too small for the both of them. But then she turned, her face unreadable. "You got a problem with that?" He held her gaze. "No, ma'am. Just figuring out what kind of woman patches a man up after killing 2 others. Her jaw tightened. The kind who didn't have a choice. She went back to her roots. Caleb shifted, wincing. "You live out here alone?" "Not always," she said quietly. Then she added nothing more. That night, he couldn't sleep. The wind had stilled, but left a different silence in its place, one that pressed against the walls like it carried ghosts. He stared at the beams overhead and thought about what kind of past could drive a woman to live 20 miles from anywhere, with nothing but a shotgun and a secret to keep her company. Sometime after midnight, he heard footsteps, soft ones. Willa stepped out onto the porch, pulling a heavy coat around her shoulders. Through the frost-laced window, he watched her light a lantern and walk toward the edge of the tree line, stopping by a crooked fence, half buried in snow. She stood there for a long time, unmoving, as if waiting for something, or someone. She came back in. Her face was pale but dry. She looked at him like she knew he'd been watching but didn't say a word. Just set the lantern down, stoked the fire, and whispered, "Try to rest. You'll need your strength." He didn't ask what she meant, but in the silence that followed, Caleb felt something shift. Not just in his bones or in the wound slowly knitting itself closed, but in the way this cabin, this woman, this nowhere place in the woods, had begun to feel like something more than survival, like the edge of something he didn't yet understand. By the end of the fourth day, Caleb could sit up without grinding his teeth. Willa didn't say much about his progress, just handed him a tin cup of rabbit stew and nodded like it was expected. He took it with a grunt, grateful more than he'd admit. The fire crackled low, giving the small cabin its usual glow, warmth, half shadow. "You don't get many visitors out here, do you?" he asked, wiping his mouth on the sleeve of his shirt. She gave a slight shake of her head. "Don't want any." "Then why'd you pull me out of the snow?" Willa looked at him for a long second. "Because leaving you there would have made me someone I'm not. Even if I was close." Caleb didn't press. He just nodded and leaned back slowly, the stew settling warm in his belly. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a white silence and sky so blue it hurt the eyes. But the snow wasn't the only thing that had settled. Something about the air between them had changed too. It wasn't trust, not quite, but maybe the ghost of it. Later, while she was brushing down the old mule in the lean-to, Caleb spotted something at a box beneath the cot where he'd been sleeping, a simple wooden thing with a broken hinge, half buried under a folded quilt. Curiosity wasn't usually his weakness, but something about the way she guarded silence made him want to peek behind it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to a name he didn't recognize. But one envelope caught his eye. The corner was torn, like it had been opened and shoved back in too fast. The handwriting was elegant Eastern, maybe the kind city girls learned in finishing school. He held the letter just long enough to read the salutation. To Miss Charlotte Whitmore. He froze. Willa came in then, quiet as a whisper. Her eyes dropped to the letter in his hands, and her face changed, not angry, not even surprised, just tired. The kind of tired that goes deeper than bones. "Put it back," she said softly. Caleb did. She walked past him, picked up a log, and fed it into the fire, like nothing had happened. But the truth hung in the room now, heavy as smoke. "Charlotte Whitmore," he said after a while, his voice low. "That name's worth money in 5 counties. She didn't look at him, more like a noose. He didn't push. Not then. That night, she told him a little, enough to make the silence hurt less. Her family had come west from Missouri after her father was accused of fraud. They'd lived quiet for a while until a man from her father's past found them. Said she had information. Said she'd be safer if she did what he told her. Said a lot of things before he burned down the last house she called home. That's why I don't go into town," she said, staring into the fire. "That's why I carry a gun." "And the name?" Caleb asked gently. She hesitated. "I buried Charlotte in Missouri. Willa's all I have left." Caleb watched her as she spoke, and something inside him shifted again. Not pity, he knew better than to pity. A woman who'd survived fire, but a kind of awe. She wasn't just hiding out here. She was rebuilding quietly, painfully, one stitch at a time. "You're not her anymore," he said after a long pause. She turned to look at him. "And that ain't a bad thing." Her eyes softened. Just a flicker, but enough to tell him the words had landed. The snow melted slow over the next few days, curling back from the trees and revealing the stubborn bones of the land beneath. Caleb had started moving more, helping where he could, chopping firewood with one hand braced on his ribs, limping out to check the chicken coop with a shotgun over his shoulder. Willa didn't ask him to. She didn't need to. There was something unspoken between them now. Something heavier than gratitude, but softer than obligation. One afternoon, as the sun slid low behind the ridges, she brought out a deck of cards, said it used to help her father calm his nerves during hard winters. Caleb chuckled, called her bluff, and lost 3 hands in a row before realizing she was better at poker than most saloon dealers he'd known. You always cheat with that face, he asked, grinning through the steam of his chipped coffee mug. She smirked. Only when the stakes are low. They were laughing when the knock came. Not loud, not frantic, just a single, deliberate rap on the cabin door. Caleb froze. Willa's smile vanished. The fire popped in the silence that followed. Willa stood slowly, eyes narrowed. She reached for the shotgun by the door and tilted her head toward Caleb. Stay back. She opened the door, no wider than her shoulder. The butt of the shotgun still pressed tight to her hip. A man stood there, thin, older, wrapped in a black coat flecked with trail dust. He removed his hat, revealing pale gray hair and sharp eyes. That seemed to weigh her in a heartbeat. "Ma'am," he said, voice gravello. "Name's Tobias Marsh. I'm looking for a woman goes by Charlotte Whitmore. You've seen her." Caleb saw Willa's fingers tighten on the stock. Just slightly. "No one like that here," she said flatly. The man nodded, like he'd expected the answer. "Funny. Folks in Dry Creek said a wounded cowboy passed through, got hauled off by some woman north of the ridge. Cabin matches your description." Caleb stepped forward then, slow and careful. "That was me. Woman saved my life. If you got business with her, maybe you say it plain." Tobias shifted his gaze to Caleb. "I got no quarrel with you, son. I'm just following orders. There's a bounty, big one, for information leading to Charlotte Whitmore. Some folks back east want answers she never gave." Willa's voice was ice. "What kind of answers?" The man's eyes lingered on her face. "The kind men kill for." She didn't flinch. "Then maybe they ought to stop asking." Tobias gave a tight smile. "Maybe. But that's not how the world works." He slipped a folded piece of parchment from his coat and placed it on the step. "They won't stop looking. Not for her. Not for what she knows." Then he turned and walked back into the woods, leaving behind no more tracks than the wind allowed. Inside, the cabin felt colder than it should have. Willa stared at the paper. Caleb picked it up and read the words silently wanted for conspiracy, aiding and abetting, obstruction of federal investigation. Reward, $500. He looked up. "Is any of this true?" She didn't blink. "Does it matter?" He folded the paper. "Not to me." She looked at him then, not like she was trying to judge his intentions, but like she couldn't believe he meant it. Like maybe, just maybe, someone staying was harder to accept than someone running. Outside, night settled deep into the trees, but inside, for the first time in a long while, there was something stronger than fear pressing against the walls of that cabin. It was trust. Still small, still fragile. But there, the next morning, Willa didn't speak. Not out of coldness, but out of the kind of silence that meant something was breaking apart inside her hand. She didn't want anyone to hear it. She moved like always, making coffee, brushing the snow off the porch, chopping carrots into the stew pot, but there was a stillness in her movements. Like each task was the only thing holding her together. Caleb didn't press her. He just stayed close, mended a bridle strap by the hearth, and kept an eye on the tree line outside. He wasn't sure if Tobias Marsh was the last knock they'd hear on that door. Late afternoon, when the wind had died and the shadows stretched long across the snow, he found her in the loft above the cabin. She was sitting cross-legged beside a crooked floorboard, a crowbar beside her knee and a dusty satchel in her lap. Her fingers were trembling as she unfolded a letter yellowed with time. Caleb stood in the ladder frame, hesitant. "You all right?" She didn't look up. "My father wrote this the night before he disappeared. Said if anything happened, I was to keep it hidden until I couldn't run anymore. And you think now's that time?" "I think it may have been that time a long time ago." She held the letter out without meeting his eyes. He climbed up and took it. The handwriting was stiff, faded, written in ink that had bled from age and worry. "Charlotte, if they ever come, don't speak. Not to the law, not to the marshals, not to the bankers who think paper means more than a man's word. They'll say I forged bonds, that I stole from men richer than kings. Maybe I did, but I did it to keep food in our mouths and your mother out of a pine box. They won't care why. They'll just come swinging ropes. So you run, you disappear, you live. And if someday you find a man worth trusting, maybe you tell him. Not because he can fix it, but because no secret should stay buried forever. Your father, a Whitmore." Caleb folded the letter with care, like it might shatter. He looked at her, still staring at the empty space beneath the floorboard, like it held something sacred. "Willa," he said gently, "this letter clears you. He admits everything. Why haven't you brought it forward?" Her voice came low. "Because they don't care about the truth. They care about vengeance." You think a judge in Kansas is gonna read some dead man's letter and let me walk away? No. They'll call it fabrication. Or say, I helped him. Caleb sat beside her, the floor creaking beneath his weight. So what now? She finally looked at him. That man yesterday, he wasn't a bounty hunter. He was a warning. Others are coming, maybe days from now, maybe hours. And they'll bring more than words. Caleb nodded slowly, jaw set. Then we decide. We run, or we make a stand. Willa held his gaze. You'd stand with me? Even knowing all this. He gave a quiet breath. You pulled a bullet out of me, fed me, gave me shelter when you had no reason to. You've stood alone a long time. I figured someone ought to stand with you now. Her eyes glistened, not tears, not quite. Just that shimmer that comes when a person feels seen after too many winters of being invisible. I've been running since I was 16, she whispered. I'm tired. Then let's stop running. They spent that night planning, packing only what mattered, boarding up the windows tighter, sharpening blades and cleaning Caleb's revolver, though Willa still kept hers closer. The letter went back beneath the floorboard, but this time, wrapped in oilcloth and bound tight. Not for hiding, for keeping. Because maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something else. Not an escape, but a reckoning. Would you keep running, or finally stand still and face what's behind you? Willa just chose to stop. And Caleb, he chose to stay. But the world doesn't always let you decide your own peace. What do you think they should do next? Comment below. And don't ride off. Yet. It started with hoofbeats far off. Steady, like thunder pressed flat against the snow-packed earth. Caleb heard them first, just after dawn, while he was checking the traps behind the cabin. 3 riders. Maybe 4. Moving slow, careful. Men who didn't want to be seen but didn't expect to be stopped. He slipped back inside, bootsteps soft, over frozen mud. Willa was already awake. Coffee on the stove, sleeves rolled, pistol strapped tight across her hip. She didn't ask how many. She didn't have to. They'll want the letter, she said quietly. Caleb nodded. They'll want you worse. Outside, the sky was a pale gray sheet, heavy with coming snow. The land held its breath the way it always did, before something broke loose. They didn't hide. Not this time. Caleb walked out to the front porch, coat open just enough to show the butt of his revolver. Willa stood in the doorway behind him, her fingers curled tight around the frame. Rifle loaded and leveled but not yet raised. The men rode up slow, dressed not like marshals but mercenaries, clean hats, heavy coats, and the kind of eyes that had seen death and decided they liked the view. The one in front was younger than Caleb expected, barely 30, handsome in a sharp, careless way. He pulled off his gloves, one finger at a time, like he had all the minutes in the world. You must be Ryder, he said, looking Caleb over. Name's Voss. I ain't here for you. Caleb didn't move. Then turn your horses around. Voss laughed. Can't do that. Got business with the woman behind you. Charlotte Whitmore, if I'm not mistaken. She's not that name anymore. Don't matter what she calls herself. That name's worth $500 to the men who sent me, and a hell of a lot more to the ones who want her gone. Willa stepped onto the porch then, rifle down but not lowered. You shoot me now, Voss, and you lose the only piece of evidence anyone ever cared about. Letter's gone. Burned it last night. He blinked, then smiled slowly. You didn't. She didn't return the smile. I did. So if you're here for proof, you're wasting your ride. Voss turned to his men, then back to her. I don't give a damn about the letter. I'm here to clean up a name, not sort out the truth. Dead's cleaner than a trial. Caleb stepped forward. Then you'll have to come through me first. Voss's smile faded. You sure about that, cowboy? Ain't your fight. It is now. There was a moment, one of those frozen, aching seconds where time feels like it forgets to move, where no one breathed. Then Voss's hand twitched. But Willa moved first. The shot cracked through the still morning, sharp and clear. Voss's shoulder snapped back, his coat blooming red. He fell hard, cursing, while his horse reared. Caleb fired next, grazing the second man's leg and forcing them all to scatter. It didn't become a bloodbath, not yet. Just a standoff. Guns drawn. Pride bleeding. Willa raised her voice, steady and cold. I know what you came for. But this cabin's the last place I run from. You want me? Fine. Bury me here. Voss was pale now, teeth gritted, clutching his shoulder. But something in her voice, some old unbreakable thing, made him pause. You're not worth dying for, he spat. Neither are you, she said. Calm. He looked at Caleb, then back at her, and something in his face cracked, not defeat, but a recognition that the fight he thought would be easy had turned into something too costly. He spat blood into the snow. "This ain't over." "No," Willa said. "It's just not yours anymore." They rode off. No fanfare. No second try. Just the sound of hooves fading into the trees. Later, as the snow began again, light and quiet as dust, Willa leaned against the porch railing and let out the kind of breath that sounded like it came from years ago. Caleb stood beside her, both hands resting on the rail, like he wasn't ready to let the quiet stand alone just yet. "You burned the letter?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but I would've." He smiled. "I figured." The wind rose, through the trees again, soft and familiar. And for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt like they had to run from the sound. 3 days passed after the gunman rode off. The snow softened, and with it, so did something inside both of them. The cabin no longer felt like a hideout. It felt like a place that had earned its silence, earned every floorboard groan, and not in the walls. The kind of place where broken things didn't just wait, they mended. Caleb's wound was almost fully healed now. He moved steady, could saddle a horse, split a log, and clean a rifle without wincing. But there was something else. Something he didn't speak of. Not even when the nights turned long and quiet. A weight that didn't come from pain. A memory that followed him like dust he couldn't shake. One morning, Willa found him out by the creek, sharpening a blade that didn't need sharpening. She approached without sound. Just the crunch of boots and thawing snow. "You keep grinding that knife like that, you'll whittle it down to nothing," she said gently. He gave a faint smile, but didn't look up. "Some things are easier to fix when your hands are busy." She sat beside him on a fallen log, her fingers trailing over the edge of her coat. "What are you thinking about when you're this quiet?" Caleb stared into the water. "A boy." She waited. "I had a little brother," he said finally. "Eli. We were raised rough, worked a ranch outside El Paso. Mama died young. Pa drank too much. By the time I was 16, I was already riding fence and breaking horses, trying to keep food on the table." He paused, eyes distant. "Eli was sweet. Too sweet for that life. He used to draw pictures in the dust. Said he'd grow up to be a school teacher. I used to laugh at him for it." His voice cracked. "I thought I was toughening him up. Truth is, I just didn't know how to love anything soft." Willa watched him, quiet. "One winter, Pa got mean. Put hands on Eli. I stepped in. There was a fight. Long story short, I ran, told myself I'd send for Eli once I was set up somewhere else. He finally looked at her. By the time I did, it was too late. A letter came. Said Eli died of fever. No one even told me he was sick." Willa's hand moved, just slightly, like she might reach for his. Caleb looked down at his blade again. "So when I saw you that day, cornered on the road, I think part of me saw him. The boy I couldn't protect. The one I left behind." Silence settled between them, not heavy, but sacred. Willa finally spoke. "You didn't run from him. You ran for him." He turned to her, startled. She shrugged. "You tried to make a better life. That's not nothing, Caleb. Maybe it wasn't enough, but it was something." Caleb swallowed hard. Willa placed her hand over his, just briefly, then stood. "We all carry graves that no one else can see. That don't mean we have to lie down in them." He watched her walk back toward the cabin, the hem of her coat sweeping snow. For the first time in years, he felt something lift, not forgiveness. Not yet, but the ache of remembering being replaced with the courage to stay present. That night, they shared a pot of stew, said little, and watched the fire glow low. Outside, coyotes sang to the moon, and neither of them flinched at the sound. Inside, two people who'd been hunted by their pasts sat quietly, and let the warmth hold them a while. It was the quiet that changed first. Not the kind of silence that comes from fear or hiding, but the kind that settles after a long storm where even the birds seem to take a breath. Willa noticed it one morning while stirring the ash in the stove. The air still and soft, like it had been holding its breath for too long. Caleb had just come in from feeding the mule. His coat dusted in frost, cheeks red from the chill. He stomped. His boots shook off the cold, and tossed a bundle of firewood by the hearth like it weighed nothing. Then, without thinking, he bent down to pick up a tin cup from the floor just as the handle snapped and water splashed straight up his shirt. He blinked, looked down. Damn, things got worse aim than a whiskey girl in Abilene. And Willa, without meaning, too, laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite smile. A real, full laugh. Sharp and sudden and entirely human. Like something long buried had just clawed its way up from the dark and didn't ask for permission. She clapped a hand over her mouth, startled by the sound. Caleb froze, eyes wide like he wasn't sure what he'd heard. I'm sorry, she muttered, trying to stifle it. That wasn't. But Caleb grinned. Don't be. Hell, I've been trying to get that sound out of you since day 2. She rolled her eyes, cheeks flushed, but there was something new in her face, something softer. It's just been a long time, she said quietly, since I remembered what that felt like. Felt good, he said. Felt real. The moment hung there between them, warm and flickering, like the edge of something neither dared name just yet. Later that day, she pulled out a bundle of fabric from an old trunk, laid it across the table with care. A quilt, half finished, the thread yellowed and stiff from time. She ran her fingers over the squares, some stitched with names long forgotten, others just scraps from dresses she once wore. My mother started this, she said every woman ought to leave something warm behind. Caleb watched her quietly. Why'd you stop? Because I didn't think I'd have anyone left to give it to. She looked up at him. But maybe that was never the point. They sat together that evening, stitching in silence. Her hands were steady, his clumsy, but learning. They didn't speak of the past, didn't name the fragile thread pulling them closer with each hour. But in the hush of that small cabin, beneath the crackle of fire and the whisper of thread through cloth, something unspoken was being mended, slowly stitch by stitch. When the wind picked up outside, they didn't notice Dot, and when Willa finally leaned her head on Caleb's shoulder, just for a moment, he didn't move. Just let her rest there, like she'd belonged all along. The storm rolled in from the west, just before noon-gray, low-hanging and heavy with unfinished business. Caleb could smell the snow before he saw it. Thick air, damp bark, wind curling through the valley like a whisper that hadn't decided what to say yet. He stepped off the porch, eyes scanning the horizon. But it wasn't the sky that made his chest tighten. It was the rider. Single horse, slow gait, no rush, no flag of threat. Just a figure wrapped in a brown duster, swaying slightly in the saddle, like someone who'd traveled far with nothing left to lose. Caleb called for Willa. She joined him outside, rifle in hand, gaze sharpening. That's not one of Voss's men, she murmured. How can you tell? Because he's not pretending he's not afraid. He's carrying it plain. As the rider came closer, they saw he was young, barely more than a boy, face pinched. From cold coat to sizes too big. He stopped a dozen paces from the porch, dismounted stiffly, and raised both hands in peace. I ain't here for trouble, he said, voice cracking. I just got a letter. Was told it belonged to someone up this way. Willa lowered her rifle slightly. Who sent you? The boy pulled a worn envelope from his satchel, held it out like it might bite. An old woman from Missouri. Name was Whitmore. Willa's face drained of color. She's alive? Caleb asked gently. The boy shook his head. She passed 2 weeks back. Before she went, she gave me this. Said it was for a daughter she hadn't seen in over 15 years. Told me to ride north, find a cabin with blue shutters, and give this to a woman who looked like she'd forgotten how to cry. Willa stepped forward, hands trembling as she took the envelope. It was yellowed, sealed with wax, and had only one word written on the front dot. Charlotte. She walked back inside without a word. Caleb followed minutes later. Found her sitting at the table, the letter open before her, her hands clenched in her lap. She didn't look up as she read, but her lips moved faintly, like repeating words she'd waited her whole life to hear. My sweet girl, if this letter finds you, then Grace did too. I never blamed you, not once. Your father made his choices to protect us, and you bore the weight he should have carried. I should have followed you. I should have fought harder. I pray you found a place to rest your heart even if it wasn't with me. You were always braver than I ever taught you to be. I hope you've loved something. I hope someone's loved you back. If nothing else, know this: your name, whether Charlotte or anything else, is still the most beautiful word I ever knew. Mama. When Willa finally looked up, her eyes were full, not broken, not wrecked, but full in the way a woman gets when the dam inside her finally stops holding back water that needed to fall. Caleb sat across from her, said nothing, but she reached for his hand, not to be held, to hold, and in that gesture was something deeper than the letter, deeper than the storm now tapping soft against the windows, something like belonging, something like forgiveness. I spent so long trying to forget that name, she whispered. But maybe it's not about forgetting. Maybe it's about making peace with who I was, so I can choose who I want to be. Caleb's voice was steady. And who is that? She looked at him, I don't know yet, but I'm tired of deciding alone. Outside, the snow began to fall. Inside, two people sat with a letter, a fire, and the fragile beginning of something they'd both thought they didn't deserve. Spring came late that year. The snow took its time retreating, and when it did, it left behind mud, thawed bones, and green so tender it looked like the earth had forgotten how to hope. But it came, just the same. And with it came something else, something slow and real, something neither Willa nor Caleb had dared name until the silence between them became too soft not to trust. The roof still leaked near the chimney. Willa muttered about it every other morning, balancing a pail under the drip. Caleb offered to climb up and fix it, but she swatted his hand and told him it was her roof, and he could fix the fence instead. So he did. They planted onions and wild potatoes in the patch behind the cabin. They cleaned the lean-to, patched the barn door, and left the traps empty more often than not, because sometimes it felt better to give life space than to take it. The quilt was finished, folded at the foot of the bed she no longer slept in alone. Sometimes, when the evenings were warm enough, they sat outside and watched the sky fade into stars. She'd hum a tune her mother used to sing. He'd listen, his hand brushing hers, never rushed, never forced. The quiet between them had become something holy. One afternoon, Willa rode into town. She hadn't done that in years. Caleb offered to go with her, but she shook her head. "This part's mine," she said simply. She wore her pistol, but she didn't rest her hand on it. Walked into the post office, chin high, shoulders steady. Asked for the sheriff when he came. She placed a folded letter on his desk. "My name is Charlotte Whitmore," she said, voice firm. "This is a written confession from my father. He forged the bonds. He disappeared. I've got no illusions about clearing my name, but I'm not hiding anymore." The sheriff, an older man with kind eyes and a scar running from his cheekbone to his ear, read the first few lines. Then he looked up. "We've got bigger crooks than you, walking free every day," he said softly. "You go on now. You've done your part." She left the office with knees that shook, but she didn't stumble. And for the first time in decades, she walked the dirt street of that little town as someone who belonged there. Caleb met her halfway up the trail home. He didn't ask how it went. She didn't need to tell him. That night, she made peach cobbler from the last jar in the pantry. Said she wanted to mark the day, even if it was just for themselves. They sat on the porch again. Two tin plates balanced on their knees, the stars sharp and wide overhead. Caleb looked over and asked, real gentle, "So what now?" Willa leaned into him, head resting on his shoulder, breath soft. "I think now," she said, "we keep going. Not for who we were, but for who we're finally letting ourselves be." And Caleb smiled, because there wasn't anything more to say. The wind moved through the trees like an old friend, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, not a warning this time, just a sound reminding them that the land was still wild, still beautiful, and still theirs to belong to. The roof still leaked, the past still echoed, but the heart of the cabin had changed, because now, it held not just two people but everything they'd fought to reclaim: peace, presence, and the slow, quiet miracle of being seen and staying anyway. Not every happy ending is loud. Sometimes, it's just two people sharing peach cobbler on a quiet porch under a mended roof. What was your favorite moment in this story? Was it when they finally trusted each other, or when they stopped running? Share it below. And if this story touched you, take a breath, hold it close, and tell someone. That's how healing begins.